Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Topic UFO. Boy, we had a little technical glitch there at the beginning, had some photos crop up there. I tell you, there's always something with this live stream that I don't know why it does it. Must be poltergeist or something. We have a few folks out there tonight. Hopefully we'll have more joining us as the hour proceeds. Tonight we have Mr. James Strait, who has a radio show, internet radio show called Straight Talking, and he's going to be here to talk to us about some weird things that go on in Missouri, and then he's also going to be talking to us about what does December 21st, 2012 have to do, or what does Deja Vu have to do with December 21st, 2012? So he'll be here in just a second. We'll get him on the line. I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. We didn't have the humongous earthquake as predicted we would today. We did have one yesterday down in Mexico. So it was pretty darn close. I must say, I got to look more into this, the way they are mapping this stuff out with the moon and the gravitational pull and all that, because something's definitely in sync there with the earthquakes. So. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is we have gotten the show on another website called Past TV, pasttv.com. I'll bring up the link a little later. But they have a lot of viewership, and they are going to be replaying our shows as one of their channels. They have a ton of channels over there. I just talked to the owner there today, and they are currently transferring over some of our recorded broadcasts, and which is good. I'm glad, because it ought to bring up the viewership a bit on the video on demand stuff. Also, I became a full-fledged MUFON member this week, which is exciting. I'm going to be starting a monthly MUFON meeting here in Middle Tennessee, Nashville area, here very soon, over the next couple of weeks or so. Right now they only have one in Memphis, and they really needed one here, so they asked me if I would mind getting that together. So that ought to help out a lot of people, because they just can't drive all the way to Memphis. It's about a 4-hour drive from here. Let's see. Anything else in the news? I think that's about it. I think we're going to go ahead and get Jim on the line and get this interview going. So, hello, Jim.
Hi.
Rick Scouler from Topic UFO. You're on with us live right now.
Good deal.
So don't say anything bad about anybody. So you never know. So Jim, I'd kind of like to start off a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. I always find it interesting, the background of people who are interested in some of this more, should I say, weird or bizarre, or the UFOs or whatever. And you have quite a unique background. I was wondering if you could just start off by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I guess a brief biography would be that right out of high school I went in the military, and I spent 3 years in the military, and I was a Special Forces soldier, a Green Beret. Got out of the military in 1970. I went to school and then decided to continue playing with all the toys that I'd really fallen in love with in the military, which was mainly airplanes and helicopters. So I had all the required flying credentials to have an aviation career, and I spent 30 years as a professional pilot. And then, I guess 6 years ago, I had a stroke, and that took me out of the cockpit. And while I was convalescing and recovering from the stroke, I had to decide what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and I'd always liked broadcast radio, so I decided at age 56 I would go into broadcast radio. Of course, my friends and my family said, "How are you going to do that?" I don't know, I'll figure it out. So basically, I was introduced to a fellow who was a personality on Philadelphia's largest talk radio station, and he took me under his wing, mentored me for 6 months. I'd go into the station three times a week and watch him do what he did, and he taught me the ropes. And then he later introduced me to a fellow who owned a station in southern New Jersey. I got an hour there, and before I knew it, I was comfortable on the air, and I was interviewing a lot of interesting people. And about 3 or 4 months into it, I interviewed two fellows named Mark Moran and Mark Skierman, and they're the gentlemen who started the Weird Title series, books that cover all the states. Actually, they've done about 30 states now.
Wow.
We talked for about 20 minutes on the air, and we kind of laughed at ourselves simple and had a really good time, and we started exchanging emails afterwards. They needed somebody to write Weird Missouri. They knew I was from Missouri. They asked me if I'd like. I submitted some writing examples. Those were approved by the publisher. We talked money, and before I knew it, I was out in Missouri traveling 8,000 miles in 8 weeks and going to about 250 different venues, talking to hundreds, taking 2,700 photographs, sitting down for 3 months and writing about all the weirdness in Missouri. And that's basically how I got involved in documenting the weirdness.
Wow. Now, had you ever been to Missouri before?
Well, I grew up in Missouri.
Oh, you grew up in Missouri. Oh, okay. That's right.
That I reached adulthood there. I don't know that I ever grew up.
Yeah, you're kind of like me, I think. Yeah. So, I know we've got quite a few photos we want to show as well. How would you like to start off, Jim? Let's talk about this Weird Missouri, and maybe you can inform us on some of the weirdness out there.
Well, if you want, you can bring up a photo and tell me what you're looking at, and then I...
Okay. Well, the first one we have is of, I believe this is your son, and he looks like he's going down into a sewer pipe.
In essence, that's what that is. But there's a really great story associated with that. And before I explain what he's doing there, let me back up and tell everybody that this story happens, is birthed 9/11.
Wow.
What happened was in Greene County, Missouri, which is about this particular event is about 30 miles south of Springfield, which is in the southwestern. On the morning of 9/11, the Greene County Highway Department was in the process of drilling a 13-hole. We're going to remove a small hillside, and they had completed the drilling. They had packed 3 of those holes with explosives since of the morning of 9/11 happened.
Wow.
Not many people know it, but long after those events were obviously terrorist events, the government issued a nationwide cease blasting order. So for a couple of days, those 3 holes were packed with explosives. Didn't do anything with them, but they're worried about them because they actually, I think they guarded them 24 hours a day. But they needed to either complete the packing of the 13 holes and detonate the entire thing, or detonate those 3 just to get that over with. And they were given the go-ahead to go ahead and ignite those 3 holes that were packed with explosives. They did that. It opened up the mouth of a cave.
Oh, man.
So all the highway departments in all the state of Missouri, because Missouri is the second most cavernous state. It has 6,500 cataloged caves. I've been into 7 of the commercial caves, 2 privately owned caves, and the cave I'm explaining to you right now, which is called River Bluff Cave. When they discover a new cave by excavation, they're required to cease work and then bring in a paleontologist and an archaeologist. They can go into the cave to see if it has any real historical significance. So on that morning, Matthew Four, who is now the executive director of natural science, he was called. He'd been called many times before to come look at holes in the ground. Said when answered the phone, he kind of looked at it as an inconvenience because he figured he'd go out and just go look at another hole in the ground, and he'd give them to complete their work. But this time, when he went out there, he said he drove out to the site. He parked about 500 feet away, got about halfway up to the tracks because the hair on his arms and his neck had stood up because he said, Ice Age. And I'm 63 years old, and to me that's a pretty powerful statement when a guy that has done nothing but think about being an archaeologist and a paleontologist from the time he was had seen a lot, done a lot, been a lot of places, excavated a lot of things, stopped with his hair standing up on his arms saying he just smelled the Ice Age. To me, that was a pretty powerful statement.
Wow.
Goes into the cave.
Now, should we be looking at this cave yet?
The cave now. He decides in 10 minutes that he has just discovered the most significant find, certainly in his career, all of archaeology and paleontology in the last century. So he spends about 2 hours in there because when he comes out, he wants to be convincing because he's going to have them seal up the cave. That's what they do. They put two big 2-inch steel plates leaning up against the opening, weld it closed, backfill it. Then they cut a 30-inch hole and ran 30 feet of 36-inch diameter concrete sewer pipe out horizontally away from the mouth of the cave, and then took it an equal distance vertically. So what you see in that picture is my son climbing down the vertical portion, that man-made access to crawl into the cave that is dated to be 1.4 million years old, the oldest cave on the North American continent.
Wow.
Yeah, and that cave is full of species that are nowhere else on planet Earth. It's a little mini universe. So my son and I went through the cave, about 100 people into the cave, so it was a really privileged tour we got. And on the one wall of the cave, about 15 feet up along the wall, are the claw marks of which has been extinct for about 15,000 years. But short-faced bear was a big bear. It was about 30% bigger than a grizzly bear. A short-faced bear, probably in the dark, was trying to find his way out and had clawed his way up to that wall. And in that same area, you can see where they've excavated down about 30 feet, and you can just see layer after layer after layer of different. It's an entire strata of different species that are still available. Now, he decided that they were no longer going to explore the cave because the techniques that are used now are destructive, and he doesn't want to destroy, species that don't need to be destroyed. So he's waiting for better techniques to come along to find the new species. But they'd already found hundreds of new species. And what's really amazing about that story to me is had the events of 9/11 not happened, they would have packed all 13 holes full of explosives, and when they detonated it, they would have destroyed that entire cave. So if there's a positive thing to come out of that morning, that's one of them.
Wow. So if 9/11 would not have happened, they would have blown this thing up.
They would have blown it to pieces. It would have taken out the entire hillside.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah. So where does it stand right now? Do you know the status of the cave?
I haven't talked to Mark in about 4 years, but the status of it back then, like I said, they were waiting for better techniques to come along to do excavation. But they had wired the cave so that they could give tours to classrooms anywhere in the world because it had wireless internet access there. And he would go down, and I think on slide 3 there, picture 3, you've got a picture of my son and Mark Forer standing inside the cave. And he'll walk through the cave, giving the academic classrooms all around the world and universities tour of the cave, which I think.
Yeah, that is awesome that they can do that and then just broadcast it anywhere in the world.
Yep.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, that was pretty, your son must feel pretty lucky that he got to be involved in that as well, hey?
Great time. He came out with me for a week. I was out there for 8 weeks. Speak with me, and he got to see a lot of interesting venues. And I was really glad he was with me then because not many people have been in that cave.
Yeah, no, that was quite a treat for him, I bet.
That was.
Well, listen, I've got a list of things here that I want to talk to you about, but I'm going to just kind of pick a couple here, if you don't mind. I'll pick next one that looks pretty interesting. Something about spook lights.
Yeah, spook lights. Yeah, spook lights are. I think there's spook lights probably in every state, but in Missouri, the main spook light, the one that garners the most attention and has done so for the last 75 years, Joplin spook light. Joplin is in the southwestern state. Almost, if you think back about a year ago, Joplin was wiped out by tornadoes.
Right.
That's the area I'm talking about. But there's a road that runs from Missouri into Kansas, runs east to west, and when you park your car looking into Kansas, at the end of the day, it's very repeatable. A light will be on the horizon, and then the light actually behaves in a multitude of different ways. Sometimes it'll just sit on the horizon. Sometimes it'll move closer, then move back. Sometimes it actually comes up, will right through the cars, in between them, over them, under them, does all kinds of strange behaviors. And I got my best information about that light from a woman named Joanne Scarpolini, who had been going out there for the last 50 years. She and her husband had been taking trips out there a year, and she was a brain physician lady. She works on hard data. She has to have physical proof to believe in anything. So she started taking all kinds of instrumentation out there to record electromagnetic, optical type things. And she did a lot of studies, and this was over a period of 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
The light was very predictable. There was out there when it didn't show up. A multitude of people try to explain it through headlights in the distance and reflection.
Hey, Jim? Jim? Yeah, you're breaking up. You're going silent. Are you on a speakerphone by any chance?
I am, yeah.
Oh, is there any chance you could go to a handset?
Yeah, I'll take it off speaker.
Okay, great.
So is that better?
Oh, much better. Yeah, you were just breaking up here and there.
Okay. Yeah, so she had been out there, many, many hundreds of times. And as of 5 years ago, when I had about a 2-hour conversation with her on the phone, she had said that she does not know what is going on with the spook light. She doesn't know what it is, why it's there. But she does know that its behavior in the last 5 years, and that would go back 10 years now, is that the light doesn't show up as frequently. It's not as intense. And she thinks it's because, number one, the road had recently been paved. It had been, for the previous years, it had been a gravel road. Mm. And they're also building subdivisions in the area. And she thinks that, the fact that they're grading the topography out there, the changing the landscape, she thinks that's somehow influencing the behavior of the light.
Now,
is a big deal out there, yeah.
Now, is this something similar to, say, the Marfa lights in Texas? Are you aware of?
I'm not familiar with them, but like I said, I do know that I've read enough to think that there's probably spook lights in every state, some form of light like that, yeah.
And they have not been able to 100% confirm what it is, right?
No, it's still a mystery.
That's just amazing that we have things like that happening in our country, and we can't explain it. Well, listen, I know you have something here regarding a story behind the first known UFO incident in 1941. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Because it took place 6 years before Roswell in 1940. And the story was related to the reporters by the wife of the man who was the principal in the story. And she related this story on her deathbed, and that's why the story was given so much credence. But basically, in 1941, a crash of some kind of a craft happened just outside of Cape Girardeau, which is in south central Missouri. And I guess probably the most prominent minister in town was approached by the sheriff to come out to give last rites to some deceased entities that had perished in a crash. And he certainly agreed, and they went out to the crash site. And he was expecting to find some kind of a civilian or military airplane. But when he got there, he saw police and firemen, which he expected, but he did not expect the military, and he did not expect to be approached by the FBI. So when he gets there, the FBI approaches him and said, there is a crash scene over here. We'd like you to go over, give last rites to the deceased involved, and then just come back and you will have, accomplished what we need on your way. So he goes over to the craft. He can see inside there's 3 small entities that are clearly not human. And even though he was, it disturbed him, he gave the last rites as they asked. He noticed that the instrumentation inside the craft was something like he hadn't seen before. He noticed a different kind of script describing instruments on the walls of the craft. And he comes back to the federal agents, and they told him, they said, listen, this is a top secret thing that you're involved in. It's national security. You cannot tell anyone ever. And he agrees to that, and then he goes home and immediately tells his wife. She had him trained,
What? Okay.
So she related this story to the reporters on her deathbed, and that's the story of the 1941 UFO incident in Cape Girardeau. So it's an interesting story.
When did she die? Do you know?
I'm not sure when she died. 1953 strikes me as being the year, but don't quote me on it.
Wow. Yeah, I have never heard of that incident before. We think 1947 is the beginning of all this as far as the modern age of UFOs, and in fact, we've talked about it here on the show. There's a paper out there that does go over some of the pre-1947 incidences. I'll have to check and see if that one is in there. What town was that in again? Cape
Girardeau.
Cape Girardeau. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you have a story about the St. Louis Arch, about being the 8th wonder of the world. Tell us about that.
Well, the St. Louis Arch, is probably now it's known as the formal way to the west, but it's an extraordinary structure. If anybody hasn't been to it, I highly recommend that you go to it and take the tour. But there's several interesting facts about the Arch. Number one, it's the single largest, single-purpose stainless steel in the history of the world, and it has been a magnet for thrill seekers. It had been completed about 2 years, and a small airplane flew from the east side of the arch right over across the Mississippi River, through the legs of the arch, and then out over the city and disappeared. And they got away with it because there was no photographic surveillance stuff attached to the arch at that time. And it was a big deal at the time. I was a teenager, I remember it. And not long after that, they installed surveillance cameras. But it didn't stop people from flying through the legs of the arch. 3 or 4 more people did it. They all got away with it. They taped over the identification numbers on their airplane and their windows so they couldn't, be photographed. And they flew through the arch and got away with it. And it was, it turned out to be non-event other than it was a big news event. But it got even stranger a few years later. In the late 70s, a skydiver attempted to, they jumped out of an airplane with the mission to land on the very top of the arch, jettison their main parachute, and then jump off using their reserve parachute. And on this day of the event, this particular fellow's wife was down at the bottom of legs of the arch, videotaping the event. Didn't land on the top of the arch. He landed partway up on the leg, slid down to his death, and his wife videotaped the entire thing. So it was a very ugly event.
Yeah.
And then a couple years later, suction cup man climbed the arch using suction cups that were attached to his hands and his feet and his knees. And from what I'm told, he went up like a spider, made it all the way to the top. He also took a parachute with him, and then he jumped off using that parachute. He survived the event. He was arrested. They fined him. They gave him, I think, 90 days probation. He violated the probation. He came back to court. They essentially said, you're a complete crazy man. We don't know what to do with you.
Yeah, really. You're a human fly. What do you do with you?
Right.
You probably could escape from any jail. Yeah.
But, the arch it's really a fascinating structure. And like I said, I encourage people to go see it because it's a rewarding thing to experience. But like I said, it has attracted some real adventurous people.
Yeah. I'm looking through this list here, and I've got to talk to you about floating blue babies.
That's a great story because when I went out to Missouri initially, I had done some research online. Plus, I knew of a handful of places that I wanted to go, just remembering them as a kid growing up in the state. But I had about 30 places marked out on a map I wanted to go to, and I figured as I traveled to each of those places, I'd talk to people and find out strange, weird places and things to see. And that's the way it worked out. I was in Cape Girardeau. No, I was in, and I was at a hotel, and I was checking out. I was talking to the clerk, and she knew why I was in town because I'd checked in the night before, and I said, did you happen to think of any strange, weird things in Missouri that I could go look out? She said, oh, yeah. She said, when I was in high school, we used to go out to Carpenter's Cemetery, and when I found a cemetery, you turn off the road, you drive down a little dirt road, it goes out between trees, kind of like an overgrown road. You go back maybe about half a mile, and you come to a train track that sits up on a berm, and that terminates the road. And off to your right is an old cemetery, probably 150 years old, maybe has 200 grave sites in it. And she said that they would, at midnight, they'd come out there, they'd swing their headlights out across the cemetery. She said there would always be mist floating there, and then you would see this little blue thing that always looked like a baby bouncing around in the cemetery.
Wow.
She said she only saw it once, and she said she was in a screaming for her boyfriend to leave, and she never went back. But it was evidently a very popular thing to do, and I think it's fairly predictable how that all happens. But I don't think you'll see it in the daylight. But I can imagine, if you're out there at midnight, it's dead quiet. You're by yourself, or you're with your boyfriend or girlfriend. It could be a pretty spooky thing.
I would think so. Yeah, maybe with a couple of drinks in you, your imagination could get the best of you as well. What are your thoughts as far as what's causing it?
I'm thinking it's probably just refracted light. I mean, it always happens when there's a mist hanging over the cemetery, and they swing their headlights out across it, and maybe there's more than one set of headlights. I don't know, but I doubt that it's a blue orb of some entity that's captured there. But you never know. I mean, I consider myself a cautious skeptic about all of these things.
Right.
The caution is for me to just remember that these things could be happening.
That's right. That's right. Now, did you get to actually go and try to see the babies, or was?
I'll tell you, I was so challenged to hit so many places with the.
I could imagine.
I was there in the middle of the day, but it also gave me a chance to take a look at it and appreciate better how it could all happen. At night, you'd just see a handful of tombstones, and that would be about it. But in the daytime, I could see how it was all laid out and gave me a better understanding.
Well, listen, I wanted to. You had sent me some photos of rover lights.
Oh yeah, that's a great story. It's one of my favorite stories out there, actually. Rover, Missouri, is southeast Missouri, only about 15 miles from the Arkansas border, and always looking for unusual, strange, weird things alongside the road while driving from venue to venue because I needed a lot of stories, a lot of content. So I'm driving from having a tour through a privately owned cave, going to the far east side of the state, and about halfway there I come through this little town called Rover, and out in front of this guy's lawn, or on his lawn, out in front of his house, was a display of about 70 or 80 old steam-powered, steel-wheeled tractors. He had them very neatly arranged. They all looked in really good shape, so I thought, well, I'm going to go back and see what that's about. So I turned around, drove down the guy's driveway. He comes out of his house. I introduced myself, telling him why I'm in the state and what I'm doing. And I said I'm interested in taking a look at his tractors. He says, oh, yeah, let me show them to you. So we spend, a few minutes walking through the tractors, and he tells me about a few of them. And then we come to this little barn that was right in the middle of this display, this little, actually freshly constructed barn, a little two-story thing that was probably no more than 600-700 square feet. But he had really dolled up the inside of it, made it pretty fancy, and he took me in to show me all that because he and his wife rented out as a bed and breakfast every once in a while. And so he shows me this, and he's telling me all about it, and I spent about a half an hour with him by this time, and I'm just about thinking it's time to leave. He sensed that in me, He says, I know you want to go, but he said, I'm going to tell you something that I don't tell many people. He said, I see UFOs here, and I've been seeing them for 25 years. And I said, you're exactly who I want.
Yeah, yeah.
So he takes me into the house. He says, because I've got photographs. I've got hundreds of photographs. I said, well, let's take a look. We go into the house, in his living room. He drags out two big plastic tubs full of photo albums that are full of photographs of lights in the night sky, and those photographs are in Weird, Missouri. And the typical light is horseshoe-shaped or a wedge-shaped, maybe a couple of them that an orange string or a piece of rope that's slightly bent. There's bright circular lights that are just like a glowing orb. There's a photograph of light, a very bright orangish reddish light out behind a tree line behind his house, about 1,000 feet from his house. He's showing me all these lights, and he's telling me how he's been experiencing these things for the last 25 years, how it's a very predictable, common occurrence. He's even gone so far as to build a big barbecue deck and thing out behind his barn, because the people in the neighborhood will come over. They'll barbecue steaks, which he can provide easily because he owns a 400-acre cattle ranch, and they'll sit there in the evenings waiting for the lights to appear. He said the typical scenario is a large, bright light will come out of the Arkansas sky, come up where it looks like it's hovering over his property at, he thinks, about 10,000 feet of altitude. Out of that bright light will drop 12 or 15 smaller bright lights. Those will then shoot off to all points on the compass. The big bright light will then slowly disappear, and then about 5 minutes later, like clockwork, Air Force interceptors will arrive over the area and start orbiting.
Now, is this something that's happening fairly present, or?
Yeah, well, it was happening up until the time I talked to him, which was 5 years ago. And he'd been seeing them for 25 years. And he'd had a cattle mutilation. He had that bright light that was out behind it was evidently a landing, because when he went out there in the morning, he found a crop circle, just your basic circular crop circle. That photograph's in the book also. This crop circle is about 10 feet in diameter, where the alfalfa has been pressed down flat to the ground, and it's got a slight twisting element to it. And, it's a basic, nothing fancy about a crop circle, but, there's also, I think that picture was taken in 1998 or 1999.
Wow.
I talked to all these people, and I talked to a lot of people about sightings and, all kinds of paranormal and ghost-type things and Bigfoot. I had to make an assessment of them, and this guy was just telling me what he'd been seeing. There was no embellishment, no exaggeration, no attempt to pull the wool over my eyes. He was just, honestly relating to me what he'd been experiencing. And he says, I don't know what I've been seeing, but I've been seeing a lot of it for 25 years. He's the president of the town bank. He's a very serious guy. And so I walked away from there believing everything that he told me.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, Jim, what is your personal thoughts on the UFO phenomenon?
Okay, well, I spent, a lot of time flying as all around the world, and, most of it at night. I've seen a lot of things in the sky, especially the night sky, that I could not identify. But I never attributed any of it to being a craft from another planet or from, outside of our atmosphere. I figured it was man-made stuff that I just couldn't identify. So I have seen countless unidentified flying objects, but I've never seen anything that I thought would be a planet. So in that sense, I'm a very cautious skeptic, but I also am open-minded to people telling me what they've seen, because for one thing, it in no way harms me to listen to their story and allow them to relate it to me, honestly and openly, and I think I'm a very honest listener in that sense. But I've yet to find any evidence, irrefutable evidence, that we've been visited by a craft from another planet. But
well, let me ask you, Jim, you always hear that there's this unwritten rule within commercial pilots that you don't report UFOs to the authority. Is that true?
Well, I think there's probably a lot of reluctance to do it. I know a couple guys who have seen things that were, I guess, mysterious enough to them that they felt like it would be reasonable for them to make the report. They never did. Talked to a couple of guys that saw things that, kind of befuddled them. And so, that's the reason I remain a cautious skeptic.
Yep.
We could be visited by, by beings from another planet on a regular basis. But I'm a hard evidence kind of guy. And that's just the way I work. So.
Well, yeah, and I think we all have to be, we just can't go running skies falling just because we see a light in the sky. We've got to do the background work, the scientific work, and really find out what these things are. Because, like you say, 95% of the time, what they say that these things can be explained through normal processes or situations.
Oh.
Well, listen, I think we'll change over, if you will, and you have a new book out. I guess it's new or somewhat new, called Deja Vu All Over Again. And why don't you tell us a little bit about this story?
Well, Deja Vu All Over Again is my second completed book. After Weird Missouri, I knew I wanted to write more books, and I had a couple of false starts. And then I finally came up with an idea where I could see the story from beginning to end. And Deja Vu All Over Again is a story that takes place during the final 57 hours before the Gregorian calendar turns December 21st, 2012. So it's a story that's Mayan prophecy influenced, but it takes place in modern day. And it's a roller coaster ride of a youthful, brilliant mathematical savant who's in the employ of DARPA, that the Mayans created time distortion, a time loop, is due to loop again to reset on December 21st. The final 57 hours before that take place, they are trying to prevent it from taking place, but there's also bureaucrats and folks in the military who want their ability, their knowledge. So they're being chased, trying to protect themselves, trying to save the world, and it's just an action-adventure book that goes from chapter to chapter in a way that shouldn't or doesn't allow the tension to break until you get to the end, and it's got a trick ending. So it was a lot of fun to write. It's a 308-page book, 90,000 words. It's an entertaining read.
So, did you have to do some research, or did you do some research on the Mayan calendar and that type of thing?
I did enough research to make the content of the story that relates to the Mayans accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned that that they have three calendars: a religious calendar, a solar calendar, just as we do. Then they have a thing called the long count, and on their long count calendar is where the calendar ends on December 21st, 2012. And why it ends there, no one knows. I have my explanation in Deja Vu All Over Again. If you talk to a dozen people who know that, the Mayan history or the calendar setup, they're going to things that are going to happen. And it's going to be interesting for sure over the next few months. Something that is talked about incessantly, nonstop, cable news and the cable shows, and it's going to be an interesting summer and fall, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Did you hear about this prediction for the earthquake today?
I know. There's really the thing with being online is that you get these predictions for every day.
Yeah. Well, this was actually done by an ex geologist, and I know there's some other people that were also predicting it. Yeah. But we did have the one in Mexico yesterday, which was pretty close. I don't know.
Well, I think that science is getting to a point where they can probably predict with some accuracy that things, a relative time frame. So, and as time goes on, that's probably going to get more accurate. So I'm not going to be surprised over the next 10 years if they're able to, pinpoint really accurately when and where they're going to happen.
Yeah, they, this the Ring of Fire It's I guess, been going in a uh, clockwise direction, and they look at things such as, you know, the animals, the fish, doing weird things, coming up closer to shore, and it's really amazing. But it seems to all be set on gravitational magnetic type stuff. And I think there's some credence there. So hopefully they can learn more. Well, listen, Jim, we're getting down to the end of the show here. So I just wanted to ask you where or how can people get a hold of your book, Deja Vu All Over Again?
Yeah, you can get Deja Vu All Over Again on Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. You can get it through Infinity Publishing. And if you actually go online, there's a multitude of online sources to buy it. But Amazon and Barnes & Noble are the two most reliable, quickest ways to get it. And also with Weird Missouri, you can do the same through the same sources, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, initial publisher for Weird Missouri. And they're readily available on both of those venues.
All right. And what about your radio show? You've got something new coming up with your radio show as well, correct?
I do, yeah. I have a new show going to be starting in a couple of weeks. It's called Book Talk Radio, and it's, in essence, a broadcast career because I'm in my course with interviewing politicians and Hollywood types and all the self-absorbed people, and the last 25 interviews I did or so were all with authors. And I really enjoyed it. Since I had become an author, I could relate to the process of writing and researching, and you know all the stresses and challenges that go with that. So I could relate to the authors on many levels. And Talk Radio is going to exclusively talk to authors, publishers, agents, anybody involved in the creation, production, and marketing of books.
Wow, that sounds great. And that's can you give that link again?
Well, that's if you go to www.straighttalks.com, that will take you to my web page, and then on that web page there's a banner where you can click live to. And as of right now, I don't know which hour of the day I'll be on. That'll be determined in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Now, will this be a live show or a recorded show, or?
It'll be live, but there'll also be podcasts on the site.
Gotcha. Well, Jim, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. Just can't thank you enough. I know you've got to be a busy guy, so we appreciate you telling us a little bit about Weird Missouri and also your new book, Deja Vu All Over Again. I'm sure we'll be staying in touch, and if there's anything I can do for you, just give me a call.
Rick, thank you for your kindness, and I'll do that. Thank you.
Very good. Have a good evening, Jim.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Mr. Jim Strait with his book, Deja Vu All Over Again and Weird Missouri. You know, there's a whole line of these weird books, Weird Tennessee, Weird Missouri, and they've got some great stories in there. So if you get a chance, check it out. I think they have one just about for every one of the 50 states, if not very close. Oh, what would we do without Mike out there in the audience? Mike, I swear to God, he is the ultimate viewer. He's got the numbers, he's got the times. Mike, I can't thank you enough. I wanted to give a shout out for my buddy out there over the pond with his show, The Unexplained, which takes place the first Wednesday of every month. It runs from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. over in the UK. Central time would be 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. I got the link up right now, or you can do a search, I'm sure, on The Unexplained. And they just finished their first show last month, so be sure to check them out coming up this month. Let's see. The other thing I'd like to say before we shut down here tonight, this is the Past TV Network link that I've got up right now. Again, We're going to be taking the finished broadcasts from Topic UFO, and they're going to be on this this channel, I guess you would say. It's more of a portal to hundreds of channels, but they were looking for more UFO content, which is good. And they got a hold of me today and asked if it would be okay, and I said absolutely. So the more viewers, the better. We're going to stay live, or I'm going to stay live for a while. I know there's only a few of us that are watching live right now, but I like coming on live and talking to you guys, and it's like my night out. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to stay live. I know that it presents issues, technical issues, all that, but what the hell? You only live once, right? All right, folks. Any questions from the chat room out there before we close it up for the night? None? Okay. All right, folks. Well, listen, thanks again for watching tonight. Keep your eyes open for more information on this Past TV network. We've got guests lined up for the next month, so we're not having to worry about that. And I appreciate you guys watching. So thanks very much. I'm going to be starting a monthly MUFON meeting here in Middle Tennessee, Nashville area, here very soon, over the next couple of weeks or so. Right now they only have one in Memphis, and they really needed one here, so they asked me if I would mind getting that together. So that ought to help out a lot of people, because they just can't drive all the way to Memphis. It's about a 4-hour drive from here. Let's see, anything else in the news? I think that's about it. I think we're going to go ahead and get Jim on the line and get this interview going. So, hello, Jim.
Hi.
Rick Scouler from Topic UFO. You're on with us live right now.
Good deal.
So don't say anything bad about anybody. So you never know. So Jim, I'd kind of like to start off a little bit, weird things that go on in Missouri, and then he's also going to be talking to us about what does December 21st, 2012 have to do, or what does Deja Vu have to do with December 21st, 2012? So he'll be here in just a second. We'll get him on the line. I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. We didn't have the humongous earthquake as predicted we would today. We did have one yesterday down in Mexico, so it was pretty darn close. I must say, I got to look more into this, the way they are mapping this stuff out with the moon and the gravitational pull and all that, because something's definitely in sync there with. Hey everyone. Welcome to another episode of Topic UFO. Boy, we had a little technical glitch there at the beginning, had some photos crop up there. I tell you, there's always something with this live stream that I don't know why it does it. Must be poltergeist or something. We have a few folks out there tonight. Hopefully we'll have more joining us as the hour proceeds. Tonight we have Mr. James Strait, who has a radio show, internet radio show called Straight Talking, and he's going to be here to talk to us about some with the earthquakes. So another thing that I'd like to talk about is we have gotten the show on another website called Past TV, pasttv.com. I'll bring up the link a little later, but they have a lot of viewership, and they are going to be replaying our shows as one of their channels. They have a ton of channels over there. I just talked to the owner there today, and they are currently transferring over some of our recorded broadcasts, and which is good. I'm glad, because it ought to bring up the viewership a bit on the video on demand stuff. Also, I became a full-fledged MUFON member this week, which is exciting. If you wouldn't mind, I always find it interesting, the background of people who are interested in some of this more, should I say, weird or bizarre, or the UFOs or whatever. And you have quite a unique background. I was wondering if you could just start off by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I guess a brief biography would be that right out of high school, I went in the military. And I spent 3 years in the military, and I was a Special Forces soldier, a Green Beret. Got out of the military in 1970. I went to school and then decided to continue playing with all the toys that I'd really fallen in love with in the military, which was mainly airplanes and helicopters. So I got all the required flying credentials to have an aviation career, and I spent 30 years as a professional pilot. And then I guess 6 years ago, I had a stroke, and that took me out of the cockpit